Welcome back to CROSSPOLITIC. We are really excited with our guest today, Mr. Andrew Klavan. He's the author of internationally best-selling crime novels, such as True Crime, turned into a film by Clint Eastwood, Don't Say a Word, filmed by Michael Douglas, Empire of Lies, a number of other awards, novels, and so forth. I'm looking at the back of this book, The Great Good Thing, which is the thing that we're really excited about talking with Andrew today about. But you know, he's got write-ups from Stephen King. Wow. You know, New York Times, Forbes, Publisher Weekly. So Andrew, we are really, really grateful to have you on the show today. Thanks for being on here.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Chocolate, you got to give me the book back.
Okay.
Hold on.
I'm trying to figure out, how do we get these guests? This is amazing.
You keep stealing my book, but I wanted to start. Actually, I want to start at the end,
which is always a good place to start when you haven't read the book.
But you know, I just love this in your acknowledgments. Before I began this memoir, I would have said, if asked, that my work was my life. Having finished, it now seems to me that, in fact, my life was my work, a work assigned to me, to the author, by his author.
Oh,
the work of journeying to a true faith. I love that. I was telling you a moment ago before we started. I've really been blessed already from what I've read in the book. It's beautiful. That's just just a little snatch of it there in your acknowledgments, but. Talk to us a little bit and talk to our listeners a bit about how you came about to write The Great Good Thing.
Well, it started at the moment of that I realized that I should be baptized. I grew up in a Jewish household. I was an agnostic. I call it an agnostic, but I was a practicing atheist most of my life. Yeah. And about 5 years before I was baptized, I realized, I came to understand that there was in fact a God, and I developed a relationship with him. And I had this kind of shocking moment after 5 years of prayer when I said to God, you know, you have changed my life. This relationship has changed my life so beautifully that I don't know how to say thank you. I don't know what I, who's just some schmo, can do for you or God. And the words kind of came directly, immediately into my head, almost as if they were spoken there, saying, you should be baptized. Huh. And I immediately said, you got to be kidding me. You know? why would it? I mean, nothing was further from my mind. And because it created a lot of problems for me, problems with my family of origin. I knew it would create problems with my father. I knew it would create problems. I was working in Hollywood, writing screenplays. I knew that would create some problems.
No.
I started looking for a loophole, you know. I started thinking, well, maybe I just made that up. Maybe it was just something that came into my head.
It could be a closet Christian.
Say it again?
So you could be a closet Christian, maybe.
Right. Maybe I could hide it. And, I spent 5 months, kind of tormented 5 months, going over my life, bit by bit, to see if I had made a mistake, to see if the logic held up, because everything in my life has been about making sense.
Right.
I've always wanted my ideas to make sense, right. To not say the kinds of things that you say in a philosophy class, but the minute you leave the class, they don't mean anything.
Right.
And so that experience of going over my life became the basis of the book, and it was 10 years before I wrote it, because I didn't know why anybody would be interested in it. It was, I'm a storyteller. I tell stories about gangsters and shooting and crime and stuff that's inherently interesting. I didn't know why anybody would want to hear about my life, but it started to occur to me over time that kind of everybody was in the situation I was in. Like, everybody is in this default atheist world, a world in which we are told constantly by entertainment, by professors, by the news media, that if you believe in God, you're kind of weird. And if you believe in Jesus, you're a dope. You're not one of us. You're Clem from out in the flyover country.
Now,
and
you mentioned when you were younger in your book, you wanted, kind of talking about some of your logic and how you kind of had this need to make sure everything made sense, even in your dreams. And
even my daydreams.
Even your daydreams, right? And you'd say even if the dream was kind of a wacky dream, you still needed like the internal logic to work its way out. And
it was. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it seemed like that was kind of like almost the beginning of, and of course you can always look back 2020 to better understand what happened in the past, but it seems like that was kind of the beginning of you even thinking about or making your way towards Christ.
It definitely was. I mean, and that was kind of the reason I wanted to write the book, was just to say that with just that, the insistence on making sense, you get to God, and that, because when I was coming up, relativism, moral relativism was just becoming the thing. It's what you were taught in school. You were taught that there was no one better moral path and another moral path. It was all opinions, and one culture was as good as another, and so on. And I just, over time, just pure observation gave me to know that was ridiculous, And it takes a long time. It takes a long time to break out of the water. We were surrounded by this kind of culture, like it's the air we breathe, and you don't even know you're in it, unless you start to make sure that you make sense, and then suddenly you realize that certain things you're being told just don't work.
One of the things I really appreciate is how you do, and you've already noted this, but in your book you're having to reckon with just how big of a deal it would be to convert. How big of a deal, all the ramifications. You reference, your father, your family, Hollywood, so on. I really like this section in introduction. He said, as a writer, I prided myself on seeing and describing the world as it was, not as I wanted it to, or thought it was supposed to be. I made my living writing hard-boiled fiction about tough, cynical men and femme fatales swept up in ugly underworlds of crime, sex, and murder. Would I suddenly be reduced to penning saccharine fluff about some little girl who lost her pet bunny, but Jesus brought it back again? Oh, God, I prayed fervently more than once. Whatever happens, don't let me become a Christian novelist.
Oh, that's great.
I read that. I thought he understands. Especially,
it really is tough. It's like
I know.
I feel there's a lot of pressure to sort of create Candyland for Christians. That like God is supposed to be God of this perfect world, and people die, and you're not supposed to feel grief because they're going to a better place. And I just don't live in that place at all. I mean, I live in a place where corruption is there every single minute of the day in my own mind and in the world around me.
Right.
People don't talk can hardly get out a sentence anymore without cursing.
Yeah.
I can't create a fake world for Christians to live in that makes them feel good when I'm living in a world that sort of is at odds with everything that's in my heart. I want to create that world so you can see God in that world, not in that kind of, God is not dead, perfect universe.
Yeah.
Now, Andrew, you're a Jew, right?
I'm a Jew, yeah.
Yeah, so when you talk about, kind of finding God, it seems like a lot of times our conception of Jews, especially from the evangelical standpoint, we look at you guys like big brothers in a lot of ways. So, and for some of us, it's hard to imagine that how disconnected you are from, you say you were a relativist at the time, and basically a practical atheist. And a lot of people are hearing that and saying, what? Dude, you're a Jew. You had God's law. You're practicing all the time. What?
But this is very common in the Jewish community. I mean, I grew up. My father, it was very important to my dad that we knew Jewish culture, and we went to Hebrew school, and I was bar mitzvahed. But he didn't really believe in God, and my mother was the most convicted atheist I ever met. I mean, she lived and died just thinking the whole thing was nonsense.
Wow.
And so for me, it just became this kind of empty exercise. Why am I learning Hebrew? Why am I reading the Bible? What sense does that make? It doesn't make any sense. And so I felt it was kind of just this empty house that I was in. And on top of that, and this is something that this is so touching to me, because evangelicals in America are the best friends the Jews ever had. But Jews are convinced many Jews, I should say, are convinced that Christians are their enemies. That this history of anti-Semitism that grew up in Europe, in the Middle Ages, sticks. Yeah. And they always feel that to go over to the other side is to defect to the enemy. Very good. That's a very much of a default Jewish position. And I remember I told one Jewish friend, I think I put this in the book, I told one Jewish friend I'd been baptized, and the first thing he said to me was, "They'll still kill you."
Oh, man.
We got you now, Andrew. I remember I was at this church one time. This must have been about 10 years ago. And I was looking through their church newspaper. And this is just a bad theology, bad view of the end times kind of a problem here. But there was, I think it was Pat Robinson was on the front of this ad in their newspaper saying, "Help persecuted Jews return to Israel and see biblical prophecy fulfilled."
Oh, yeah.
Basically, you could donate money to help Jews fly home to Israel and fulfill biblical prophecy.
Yeah, I remember
Which is about like trying to ship African slaves back to Africa, right?
We don't want to go back.
We're good.
We're good.
We're good. Hey, let's put you back in the Middle East and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm having a good time here, but I have to go back to bring on the end times.
Yeah. You can still write for us. That's fine. We'll take your letters and your stories.
Internet works.
Yeah, you're right. You got email. Why not?
Yeah. So you go ahead, Toby.
I was just going to say, have you found? I mean, so you said this Jewish culture was sort of this empty house, but I mean, so since coming to Christ, have some of those things from your past that never made sense, have they come in handy? Have they kind of clicked for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I never felt, I always felt like a cultural Jew. I was a wiseacre.
Sure,
I would say, I was an urban guy and all this stuff, but only when I found Christ did I suddenly think, oh, I get it. I get what a Jew is. Now I understand in what way I'm a Jew. It just didn't exist before that. I would never have said, if a religious Jew had said to me, "Are you Jewish?" I would never have said just yes in my whole life. And now when you said to me just now, "Are you a Jew?" I immediately think, yeah, that's definitely what I am, and that's because of Christ, not instead.
And is it and for you? I mean, again, coming to Christ, I don't know. There's some sense in which. Of course, one of the things that is so beautiful about the gospel is that, the gospel is for the Jew first, and also the Gentile. Yeah. But it almost seems like there's this deeper resonance. Not that it's a different salvation or a different Jesus, but just that there's that love of God for His people. Seems like that would just be something that would really be beautiful to you.
I occasionally I'm embarrassed to tell you, I occasionally sit in church thinking, gee, Jesus and I are the only people here who have been bar mitzvahed,
That's great.
That's hilarious.
And yeah, it does. And, there's even in the way people talk in the Gospels, you can hear that echo of that Jewish slang, that questioning, that kind of dialectic, that love of going back and forth, and the way that logic defeats, even a Jew who disagrees with you has to retreat in the face of logic. Yeah. All that stuff is in the gospel, and it does make me feel very at home. It makes you feel like, oh yeah, I know who these people are.
So I want to tie a big chunk of the book together here real quick. When you were younger, you seem to have a good respect for your dad, but also a very challenging relationship with your dad. And then as you got older, because of it seemed like you kind of tied in some of how your dreams began to kind of consume you a little bit, your daydreaming consumed you a little bit, and how that also grew into kind of, as you got older, you also had kind of a high level of anxiety. It seems like all that was connected. Your relationship with your dad, your daydreams, and as you got older, it kind of came back around to basically bring you to the point of suicide.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I think a lot of that, I don't want to blame my dad. It's tough for me to talk about him because he was a good person, people who worked for him loved him. He was really wonderful to my mother. His marriage has been an inspiration to me in my marriage. Yeah. He and I just did not get along. I mean, there was something about me that really bugged him. He did not treat me the way he treated my brothers. He was much harsher with me, and he was a professional comedian. And when a professional comedian starts to take you to pieces, even verbally, it's savage stuff. It's like and you know you're a little kid, so you have no ammunition.
You can't fight humor. Yeah,
that's right. And it gets in your head that you are a bad guy. There's something wrong with you, and even when you know your father's wrong, you're always how a guy kind of incorporates his father into himself.
Yeah.
So you're fighting with yourself in the end. He's not even there. You're still fighting with yourself. And that became, a very tormenting thing. He ran me down a lot. He told me I couldn't do the things that I wanted to do, and I would never, get to where I wanted to get to. So even as I was struggling to succeed, I was struggling against myself, and that ultimately just tore me to pieces. Mm-hmm. And it was really sad in a lot of ways because, first of all, I grew up in a nice neighborhood. I had my parents stayed married. My brothers were all nice people. It should have been great. It should have been great, but it was really fraught, and it was really filled with a kind of subtle violence. And I just came to a point where I couldn't move forward anymore. I seriously did not know how to live. I did not know how I could incorporate the pain I felt and the struggle I felt inside myself. And I actually did have that night, I talk about in the book, where I sat there. I had a wife that I have adored now for 40 years, and I adored her then.
Amen.
I had a daughter I adored, and I was literally sitting there thinking they'd be better off without me. When I go back to it in my head, I just want to slap myself. I want to reach back into the past and just slap that guy.
Yeah.
And by the way, one thing that I always try to tell young people is I thought I was in the pit of hell and I was around the corner from home. I was so close to starting to come out of that pit. So close, like yards away from daylight. Yeah. And it just seemed like I was in utter darkness. And that's, one of the things when you open by reading that acknowledgement in the book, one of the things that happened to me when I read the book, and it was really magical, was suddenly when I put it all down on paper, I could see Christ there in all these crises, just like that sentimental thing they talk about with the footprints in the sand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did stuff like that. But
hey, there's your Christian authorship coming out right there in that reference.
It really was like I had to be a knucklehead to miss it when it was happening, but I did miss it when it was happening. I only saw it when I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Did your wife later become a Christian too? I didn't read the last chapter of the book, so.
She did, yes. She had, she had been kind of like me, just an agnostic kind of person who would say, "Oh, well, I'd like to believe, but how can you believe that stuff?" And then she had a very dramatic experience. Her mother, after a long illness, died in her arms, and she came home from that.
Wow.
And she said, I was wrong. I saw the spirit leave. I know there's something else,
Wow.
And so that kind of prepared her for my change. And then she basically came into the church with me.
Wow. I love how you end the introduction. You say, "Other men are born into their faith and never leave it. I was planted elsewhere and had to find my way. And when my 5-month pilgrimage to the Santa Barbara Hills was done, I came home rejoicing. I was convinced and fully convinced. My mind was God's, my soul was Christ's, my faith was true." It's been a really blessed time to talk to you this afternoon, Andrew.
We need to schedule him for a whole hour.
For real.
I know.
This is not.
I would happily come back again.
Your book is a huge blessing. It's a blessing to the church. It's a blessing to me. I grew up in the church, and
amen.
Praise God. What a blessing. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.